Address of the President to a joint session of Congress on the Middle East situation. House Chamber of the United States Capitol, January 5th, 1957.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, and members of the Congress, first may I express to you my deep appreciation of your courtesy in giving me, at some real inconvenience to yourselves, this early opportunity of addressing you on a matter I deem to be of grave importance to our country. In my forthcoming State of the Union message, I shall review the international situation generally. There are worldwide hopes which we can reasonably entertain, and there are worldwide responsibilities which we must carry to make certain that freedom, including our own, may be secured. There is, however, a special situation in the Middle East, which I feel I should, even now, lay before this body. Before doing so, it is well to remind ourselves that our basic national objective in international affairs remains peace, a world peace based on justice. Such a peace must include all areas, all peoples of the world, if it is to be enduring. There is no nation, great or small, with which we would refuse to negotiate in mutual good faith, with patience, and in the determination to secure a better understanding between us. Out of such understandings must, and eventually will, grow confidence and trust, indispensable ingredients to a program of peace and to plans for lifting from us all the burdens of these expensive armaments. To promote these objectives, our government works tirelessly, day by day, month by month, year by year. But until a degree of success crowns our efforts that will ensure to all nations peaceful existence, we must, in the interest of peace itself, remain vigilant, alert, and strong. The Middle East has abruptly reached a new and critical stage in its long and important history. In past decades, many of the countries in that area were not fully self-governing. Other nations exercised considerable authority in the area, and the security of the region was largely built around their power. But since the First World War, there has been a steady evolution towards self-government and independence. This development the United States has welcomed and has encouraged. Our country supports, without reservation, the full sovereignty and independence of each and every nation in the Middle East. Now, the evolution toward independence has, in the main, been a peaceful process, but the area has been often troubled. Persistent cross-currents of distrust and fear, with raids back and forth across national boundaries, have brought about a high degree of instability in much of the Mideast. Just recently, there have been hostilities involving Western nations that once exercised much influence in the area. Also, the relatively large attack by Israel in October has intensified the basic differences between that nation and its Arab neighbors. All this instability has been heightened and at times manipulated by international communism. Russia's rulers have long sought to dominate the Middle East. This was true of the Tsars. It is true of the Bolsheviks. The reasons are not hard to find. Now, these reasons do not affect Russia's security, for no one plans to use the Middle East as a base for aggression against Russia. Never for a moment has the United States entertained such a thought. The Soviet Union has nothing whatsoever to fear from the United States in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, so long as its rulers do not themselves first resort to aggression. That statement I make solemnly and emphatically. Now, neither does Russia's desire to dominate the Middle East spring from its own economic interest in the area. Russia does not appreciably use or depend upon the Suez Canal. In 1955, Soviet traffic through the canal represented about 0.75% of the total. The Soviets have no need for and could provide no market for the petroleum resources which constitute the principal natural wealth of this region. Indeed, the Soviet Union is a substantial exporter of petroleum products. The reason for Russia's interest in the Middle East is solely that of power politics. Considering her announced purpose of communizing the world, it is easy to understand her hope of soon dominating the Middle East. This region has always been the crossroads of the continents of the Eastern Hemisphere. The Suez Canal enables the nations of Asia and Europe to carry on the commerce that is essential if these countries are to maintain well-rounded and prosperous economies. The Middle East provides a gateway between Eurasia and Africa. It contains about 2/3 of the presently known oil deposits of the world, and it normally supplies the petroleum needs of many nations of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now, the nations of Europe are peculiarly dependent upon this supply, and this dependency relates to transportation as well as to production. This was vividly demonstrated since the closing of the Suez Canal and some of the pipelines. Alternate ways of transportation, and indeed alternate sources of power, can, if necessary, be developed. But these cannot be considered as early prospects. But these things stress the immense importance of the Middle East. If the nations of that area should lose their independence, if they were dominated by alien forces hostile to freedom, that would be both a tragedy for the area and for many other free nations whose economic life would be subject to near strangulation. Western Europe would be in danger just as though there had been no Marshall Plan, no North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The free nations of Asia and Africa, too, would be placed in serious jeopardy. And the countries of the Middle East would lose the markets upon which their economies depend. All this would have the most adverse, if not disastrous, effect upon our own nation's economic life and political prospects. Then there are other factors which transcend the material. The Middle East is a birthplace of three great religions: the Muslim, the Christian, and the Hebrew. Mecca and Jerusalem are more than places on the map. They symbolize religions which teach that the spirit has supremacy over matter, and that the individual has a dignity and right of which no despotic government can rightfully deprive him. It would be intolerable if the holy places of the Middle East should be subjected to a rule that glorifies atheistic materialism. International communism, of course, seeks to mask its purposes of domination by expressions of goodwill and by superficially attractive offers of political, economic, and military aid. But any free nation which is the subject of Soviet enticement ought, in elementary wisdom, to look behind the mask. Remember Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. In 1939, the Soviet Union entered into mutual assistance pacts with these then independent countries. And the Soviet foreign minister, addressing the extraordinary fifth session of the Supreme Soviet in October 1939, solemnly and publicly declared that, and I quote his words, "We stand for the scrupulous and punctilious observance of the pacts on the basis of complete reciprocity, and we declare that all the nonsensical talk about the Sovietization of the Baltic countries is only in the interest of our common enemies and of all anti-Soviet provocateurs." And that's the end of that quotation. Yet in 1940, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were forcibly incorporated into the Soviet Union. Soviet control of the satellite nations of Eastern Europe has been forcibly maintained in spite of solemn promises of a contrary intent made during World War II. Now, Stalin's death brought hope that this pattern would change. And we read the pledge of the Warsaw Treaty of 1955 that the Soviet Union would follow in the satellite countries, and again I quote their statement, the principles of mutual respect for their independence and sovereignty and non-interference in domestic affairs.